Welcome to another episode of Target Audience, the most trusted voice on marketing and also your new favorite podcast. On today's episode, we will explore a super interesting topic, which is how to evolve from a wanted brand to a loved brand. My name is Marco Avila, and I will be your storyteller today as we embark on this journey to find out what really a loved brand is. Let's kick it off with this very well-known section, which we call the anecdote. So the other day I was walking out on the street. I was taking my dogs for a short walk, and I ran into a friend that I haven't seen in a long time. And she asked me something like, "Hey, are you working for Nike now?" And at first I wasn't sure if she was actually asking where I was working, but then I kind of caught a glimpse of my reflection in a car that just passed by. And I realized I was ridiculously all dressed up in Nike. My sneakers were Nike. I had some sweatpants and they were Nike too. I was wearing a jacket and it was a Nike. I was wearing a hat and even the hat was Nike. And by this point, you're probably wondering if I was wearing a Nike face mask. And I wasn't. I mean, I was wearing a face mask. I'm not that kind of people, I swear. But it was unbranded. And that is only because Nike hasn't expanded yet into the face mask business. Because if they had, I'm pretty sure my face mask would have been a Nike too. But the interesting thing here is, well, I actually find two things very interesting. The first one is the decision of fully dressing myself with a single brand was made totally unconscious. I grabbed what was at hand. I was actually in a hurry. I was more concerned about my dogs not making a mess on the apartment floor because otherwise I promise I wouldn't have gone out wearing sweatpants. And the other thing that is even more interesting is that that day, on that afternoon, I became literally a walking Nike ad. And I wasn't monetizing that, so please have someone at Nike hear this podcast so they can send me a paycheck because I'm advertising completely for free. And if we kind of pause a minute to think about it, isn't that what ultimately all brands want from their customers? Like for them to become advocates of the brand? So it seems like unconsciously I became a Nike advocate, but if I think about it in a conscious way, I would certainly state that Nike is a brand that I love. But how do you go from just wanting the product of a brand versus loving the brand itself? And what did Nike do to get there? Let's take a walk on Nike's history by moving on to our next section, which is one of my favorites. You know, we call this one the facts. Chances are that most of you, my targeters, have a pair of Nikes sitting in your closet right now. If you think about it, the Nike brand, the swoosh logo, and the Just Do It slogan are universally known. Nike brand is valued at 30.4 billion US dollars as of 2021, making it one of the most valuable brands on the whole planet. But is the value of a brand in economic terms enough to consider it a love brand, or is it just a consequence of getting the love of your customers? Let's take a step back and see how Nike got to where it is right now. Nike was founded by Bill Bowerman and Phil Knight in 1964. Nike didn't went public until 1980. And that's when the company really hit strong. It was that same year that Nike took over Adidas for the very first time in the US market share. But here's where we start with not so good news. Remember that awful trend of aerobics that was super popular in the 1980s? Well, there was also a trend in awful clothes for aerobics and gymnastic class, and Reebok released a couple of chunky sneakers that were at the top of the sales charts, surpassing even Nike sales during that year. And here comes a trivia question. In 1988, Nike regained its number one status as the most sold brand for sneakers in the US. Can any of you targeters tell me how Nike achieved that? Well, they just did it. In 1988, Nike premiered the very first ever advertisement for its now famous Just Do It slogan, and they hit it big. We could say that this is the breaking point in which Nike moved from being a practical brand to become a brand with cultural impact. Through the late 80s and through the 90s, Nike got into the rhythm of dropping new and exclusive sneakers. This gave birth to the sneakerhead culture. This is a real subculture driven mostly by sneaker collectors that are willing to spend the night outside a sports store to grab a pair of the latest limited edition on the very first day of the release. Nike is so important to the sneakerhead collectors that there is even a name for those who prefer Nike over any other brands. They are called Nike heads. So if we look closely at this list of facts, they hint that Nike is a brand that people are willing to give their time, their closet space, and their money to. But is really Nike a love brand? Let's take a closer look at the definition of what a love brand is and then decide for ourselves. There are many definitions from many different sources of what a love brand is. Through my years of experience, I have come to mix and match on various definitions to get to the one I think describes better the term. For me, a love brand is the one that has a psychological connection with its customers that is not only reflected on the customer and brand relationship, but also is driving sales across the whole organization. Brand love is a trust-based relationship that involves a brand and a human. So, brands should never forget customers are actually humans with needs and emotions, and brands that connect in a human level with customers will get a stronger brand loyalty, advocacy, that ultimately leads to premium pricing. Let's go back to the Nike case. Have you ever heard of the sneakers auctions at Nike? Well, let me tell you about it. There are some models that are so limited that you actually have to participate in a sweepstake to win the chance, and listen to this closely, to win the chance to pay for your sneakers. That's right, the chance to pay. If you don't get selected, then you cannot pay for that specific pair. Of course, this strategy has a double effect. On one hand, you have a customer like me that now that they cannot have that specific pair, they want it even more. As the saying says, you only want what you cannot have. On the other hand, it opens a new market for resellers, in which there are people constantly hunting these limited editions to then resell them at a higher price. So, the reseller wins, the customer wins by getting their hands on a limited edition, and Nike wins by making their products so valuable and so desirable that people actually want a chance to be able to pay for them. This only speaks of how well this brand know how humans operate. They deliver a product of high standard that will cover a basic need, in this case, the need for shoes. And besides, they hit a lot of passion points. The desire of having something that others cannot have, the comforting feeling that I have by being selected, and therefore the feeling that I belong to a privileged small group of people, and the adrenaline and addiction feeling that I get each time I'm not selected. But let's not obviate a very important part of business: sales. It seems like Nike has gotten into the formula of translate all these passion points into sales. So much that Nike is planning on hitting $50 billion revenue in 2022. So it's not only to getting your customers to advocate for you, nor hitting all the passion points of your customers. It's also hitting them in a way that will translate into sales, and this is what really makes a love brand. But enough from Nike, right? Let's hear out some of the targeters listening today that have some questions in our section called The Inbox. This one is from @TravelGirl99, and she is asking, how would you take an airline from a wanted brand to a love brand? Woo, that's a tough one. It is actually an interesting question since service brands have it a little bit more challenging than consumer goods. Take as an example an internet service provider. Chances are the network will be down at some point. Same happens with airlines. There is 100% possibilities that a foggy day will come that will prevent airplanes from taking off and will affect customers badly. But as a service brand, you should know this forehand. The strategy should focus on both delivering a great product and also have, like I mentioned before, a trust-based relationship with customers. So when that foggy day comes, customers will trust you are delaying a flight to put their safety first. I know this is easier said than done, but it's definitely achievable. Just take a look at KLM, a 100-year-old airline that is a symbol of pride to the Dutch. In Mexico, we have our own global airline, Aeromexico, and is, in my opinion, the only one out of the Mexican airlines with the potential of becoming a love brand. Why? Remember we talked about how love brands make a psychological connection with customers? Aeromexico has all the capabilities to turn this into reality if we consider all the passion points of travelers. For instance, they have a state-of-the-art e-commerce platform that sells destinations instead of airplane tickets. It is the only airline with a strong loyalty program that not only offers benefits within the airline itself, but also can be redeemed in other stores. It is the only airline that offers VIP lounges for the top-tier customers. They also have the most modern fleet with the Dreamliner and 737 MAX. But let's not get lost on the attributes of this brand, which are actually great. As crazy as it sounds, the best customer experience for travelers will be the one that they cannot remember. When you ask somebody about their favorite trip, most of them will tell you about the destination itself, and very few will actually talk about the airplane or the great menu on board or the awesome selection of movies. Airplane tickets are so expensive that people already have high expectations on the service that they will encounter. That's why, if you ask the opposite question, tell me about your worst trip ever, there are high possibilities that people will come with an awful story about a delay on their flight, a last minute change on their itinerary, a lost baggage, something wrong with the food, and this is something customers will remember and customers will put into their stories of their worst trips in comparison to the stories of their best trips. So when it comes to flying, the smoother the experience is, the better for the customer. If you were to ask me why Aeromexico hasn't become a love brand yet, my hypothesis will be that Aeromexico is a premium brand, charging from the premium product they offer, which is setting the expectations even higher than on a regular airline, creating a gap between the perception of the brand and the experience that they are delivering. Then, when dealing with the challenges all airlines face, customers might not be receiving information in a way they feel they are being taken care of. Not as customers, but as human beings. And human beings have desires, passion points, but also meetings to attend, weddings to celebrate, and even funerals where they have to be. And when any disruption comes on their journey, they are certainly blaming the airline and not the fog. So, my recommendation here will be don't put customers at the center of the strategy. And I know it's hard to hear, but I will say it again, don't put customers at the center of the strategy. We hear that a lot, and it's something companies always brag about, but we rarely see in real life. Instead, why not put humans at the center of the company? What is the difference between a customer and a human? Well, it comes to data. A customer is a male from 30 to 35 years old that has traveled 3 times in a year. A human is Marco, 34 years old, that has traveled 3 times in a year, 2 on vacation and 1 for business. Also, create marketing that is bold and that appeals to the humanity in your customers. Take a stand, make a statement. It's not about being political. It's about showing the human side of a brand that will resonate with younger generations that are more concerned about the transparency of a brand, the causes it supports, and the values it stands for. It is a risk to take, but love brands don't do everything well. They just excel at one thing in particular, by connecting in a human level with their customers. And when you get to know your customers through the data an airline like Aeromexico is able to legally collect, then you have all the tools you need to become a love brand. So, this was it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And if you happen to know someone at Aeromexico, please get them to hear this episode. I'm not asking for much, just a senior manager role will do for me. We'll meet again on another target audience episode, so please stay tuned and subscribe.